All right, hi everyone. So today we're going to talk to you about data migration in Magento 2 and Magento's data migration tool in particular. Earlier today, Gordon did a pretty nice talk about other aspects of data of migration to Magento 2. We're not talking about code migration or moving to Magento 2 in general. It's just taking your data along with you for the ride. And so we're going to start off with a little talk about the expense of data migration. It's not a quick process. It's not easy. It's actually time-consuming and potentially expensive for you. But we also do believe that it's worthwhile.
So Magento has told us that migrating to Magento 2 is more than just a normal upgrade, and is actually a re-platform. So we don't say that to put you off, but you should really approach it more thoughtfully.
Yeah, so for example, we estimate that it takes between 4 and 12 developer weeks to migrate all of your data successfully. And that sounds like a really long time. But that cost ultimately depends on the age and complexity of your database. And if you think about your Magento 1 database, you know, how old it is, how many people have touched it over the years and years that it's been around, any upgrades it's gone through, customizations applied to it, issues you've had over its lifetime, you can see that actually that's a potentially quite tricky problem. But migration also can really reward you if you do it properly. And I guess now that we think of Magento and moving to Magento 2 as a bigger deal, there's some conversation aspects come into a re-platform discussion that maybe don't come into an upgrade conversation. Things like, you know, losing your SEO rankings because all your URLs changed, or how you're going to convince your customers to sign up on your new site. And as a spoiler, they probably won't.
So whenever we launch a new platform, you always can expect some drop in revenues, but you hope it's temporary, and the new platform will start generating much more revenue than the previous one. So if migrating to Magento 2 actually carry all those risks, if the data migration is not done or done poorly. But when it's done correctly, then it will actually take your content, it will take your SEO along with your catalog, and it can even rehash your customer passwords. So when they log in on Magento 2, then they won't even notice that the underlying platform has changed.
Sorry, what I just did there was actually kicked off the data migration process. I forgot to do it at the beginning. In a few minutes, it'll be done, and we'll show you a migrated Magento 2 site from a Magento 1 site. If the saving, you know, bringing your customers along and the revenue gains you can possibly get from that doesn't pay for a migration on its own, you can reduce your migration in scope and still get potentially great value from it. While it might be nice to take everything with you, you don't have to. If you take the minimum of your attributes, your customers, your catalog, and your orders, the rest is kind of up in the air as to whether or not you want to take it with you. Now, obviously, the more you take with you, the more entities you migrate, the greater the cost, but also potentially the greater the opportunity to use that data.
Yeah.
And so, you know.
OK, so there are plenty of tools and the partners which are performing much better with data. So as an example, it might be a .mailer. So for example, if you would like to integrate with them, it's going to be really difficult to deliver any results if you don't have any data. But if you take your customers and orders, they can hit the ground running, and they can start delivering results much quicker. So apart from, you know, marketing tools, there are also any other packages or tools which are using the data. It might be some analytics tools or tools which are analyzing trends in your data. You might be thinking, oh, I'm not using this data yet. But it's really, really good to take your data with you, because it might benefit you in the future. So let's talk a little bit about migration process. We're going to try to highlight some costs you might incur by not migrating. Also, we'll try to tell you how long it might take in preparation, and also we'll try to help you to find the sweet spot, you know, how much data actually you need to take with you. And yeah, I think that should be it.
So I want to make a kind of a minor seeming semantic point here on what an upgrade is versus what a migration is from our point of view. So we consider upgrading as moving from one Magento release to a newer or more enterprisey Magento release. And we consider migrating as making a move from a Magento 1 release to a Magento 2 release. And if we consider a Magento site, say running on 1.8 Community Edition, and we wish to move to Magento 2, there are two possible routes we can take as far as migrating our data goes. We can either just run the data migration tool from 1.8 to 2.0, and that's our job done. Alternatively, we can upgrade our Magento 1 site to 1.9 and then move that database to 2.0. And we recommend that you upgrade as much as you can and keep the migration tool responsibility to a minimum. And the reason for this is that the migration tool's newer and it's got more bugs in it. And it's not anyone's fault. It's a fact of life that as software engineers, it's our job to make bugs and then spend the next few years getting rid of them. And we've done a lot of upgrades. Lots of other people have done upgrades. And we've helped Magento find all those bugs in that process. And at this point, we're quite good at that. And as a last minor point, if you're moving from Community to Enterprise Edition, we really recommend that you migrate to Enterprise on the Magento 1 side rather than on the Magento 2 side. And just in case we didn't make that quite clear enough, we did draw a little diagram for you. And so what you do is you start at your version, and you follow the arrows to get to the version you want. And the bigger gray arrows, that represents a migration step, which is more time-consuming.
OK, so question is when to migrate. Should we do it now? Should we do it later? And our advice actually is to start the migration as soon as possible. Ideally, you should start it before the project. So when the project actually starts, you have the data up and running. But sometimes it's not possible. So try to run your migration project alongside your normal build project. And I'm specifically saying it's a project because it's a bigger task than you think. We had a couple comments from the audience saying that, oh, migration is pretty easy. I'm going to just export some CSV, import products, and it's going to be fine. No, it's not going to be fine. Magento 2 is a completely different beast, and you should really approach it carefully. So as your data cleans up, you can start providing database dump to your developers, so to front-end developers and back-end developers. And it will definitely improve the productivity, because it's much easier to work with the real data, real product attributes, rather than working with no data or some sample data, which is going to change later on. So we recommend you to start really early on that process.
Yeah, and while it takes weeks and weeks of effort to get your data into a state to be migrated, the actual migration doesn't take very long at all. We say less than a day here because on Magento's documentation, they say that the test data they use for the migration tool takes 9 hours to migrate. We've never seen any database take anywhere near that long, and we think it's because they're running their benchmark on a VirtualBox hardware, so CPU constrained and maybe RAM constrained too. But for example, the Magento 1 sample data migrates in less than 6 minutes. And in fact, if it all went OK, we would love to show it to you now.
Can you switch ones?
Yeah, sure. So, no, sorry, wrong way. Right, so here we've got two side-by-side instances of Chrome. And Martin's going to sign into the Magento 1 instance, which we can see has sample data on it. Sorry, we've got to give Magento 1 a while to load. It's pretty slow. So we've changed the password of one of the customers in the sample data to something that we can remember easily. And when he signs in, he'll be taken to his account dashboard. He's going to sign in as, well, actually, can you reload on the Magento 2?
Sure.
So you see here we've got an empty Magento 2 site. And if he reloads, you will have to give it a little while because we did just change the database completely from underneath it. You can now see that the home page is the same as it was, albeit missing some styling, and we've got the top navigation as well. And so Martin's shopping for, is it your mother-in-law's birthday coming?
That's correct.
His mother-in-law's birthday.
That's today, actually.
Cutting it fine, mate. So he's gonna look at some earrings, actually. And these swing time earrings do look nice, but he's not quite sure he wants them yet. But those pearl stud earrings there, caught his eye when he was looking, and I think they're gorgeous. And yeah, he's added them straight to his cart. I kind of want a pair myself. What he's going to do now is sign in as the same customer on the MagentaTo site. The customer exists, and our password was rehashed. And so from a customer's point of view, you didn't even change your e-commerce platform. You just did a redesign. Okay? It's going to sign in, and we're going to get taken to our dashboard. Okay? You can see we've got our historical orders, and we've also got our address book. And if we go to view our wish list, Martin, what are you doing?
Trackpads.
If you view our wish list, you can see that the swing time earrings were migrated from the Magento 1 site in real time as we added them to our wish list on the Magento 1 side. And if we add those to our cart now, and we go to our cart, you can see the Pearl stud earrings are there too. This is showing off the Delta migration capability of mapping real-time changes from Magento 1 to Magento 2, which we'll talk a little bit more about shortly. And now, this is a real quote, and this has been migrated, and the customer could, in theory, check out now. And actually, we can show you the Magento 2 checkout right now. It's gorgeous. You can see we've got a default shipping address there, and it's trying to load some shipping methods. It might not work because Wi-Fi is pretty ropey around here. But hopefully that gives you the idea of the migration, that it works, that it does migrate all of your entities, your products, your customers.
Here you go.
Oh, there we are. We've got live shipping rates from UPS as well. That's what took the extra few seconds. And it does take, potentially, if you do it right and you take the time, every single last bit of your data with you. Yeah, so do you want to head back to the presentation?
Yeah, I guess so.
Sure thing. Right. So let's talk a little bit about exactly what it was we did there. We started with an instance of 1.7 Community Edition of Magento, which we upgraded to 1.9 and then 1.14 Enterprise, and then migrated it to 2.0 Enterprise Edition. So this was a community to enterprise update. We did it this way because we thought this was the hardest way, and that if we can do that, we can do anything else too. So we installed the sample data, and then we ran the bulk migration tool, which took all of our data, and then we kicked it into the Delta mode, which takes our real-time changes with us. We'd like to just wrap up now before a Q&A session with a few technical tips on the data migration tool and how to get the most out of it if you are running a migration from a position of maybe a technical point of view. So the data migration tool supports, on the face of it, just about every version of Magento you're likely to see in the wild. That's from 1.6 Community Edition onwards and 1.11 Enterprise Edition onwards. But this comes with the giant caveat that this is the version of Magento that you initially installed. So if you started on an older version and since upgraded, you're outside Magento's view of what is supported. We've done it from a 1.3 installation. You can use the migration tool. It does work. But you will encounter certain issues with your data that maybe were not accounted for, and you will have to work around them. This is what pushes your estimate of time more towards the 12 developer week than the 4 developer week. The migration tool is pretty well documented in the dev docs, as are most aspects of Magento 2 development now. But do be aware it's under system administrator, not developer. It took me a little while to find it. The documentation's good and really makes an excellent primer, and you think probably you should read it before you try to install it and get something running. Gives you a good overview. But when you are ready to install it, it's super easy. You install a composer package. It's in Magento's composer repository, and it adds commands to the bin Magento command line tool, the Magento 2, and that's where you run it from. And it has 3 primary modes: settings to migrate your settings, data to migrate your data, and Delta to pick up any other migration that needs to happen after the fact.
Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about how to actually configure it, and probably you developers are interested in that rather than costs and other things. So yeah, configuration is no surprise. As we all know, Magento 1, they use quite a lot of XML files, and data migration tool is using even more XML files. So if you like them working with XML files, this tool is for you. And you got quite a lot of profiles in there, and as Mark said, they did all the legwork for you. So they prepared all the profiles how to migrate from 1.6 onwards and 1.11 onwards. You can find them in the folder which is on the slide. And they are really nicely grouped, like from community to community, from enterprise to enterprise, and so on. But don't get excited, because Magento only covered the bare minimum. So they only copying the data, and I'm just really focusing on the word data. They don't copy any schemas in there. So if you created some custom columns or custom tables, you need to create them first in Magento 2. Otherwise, data migration tool don't know what to do with it. You need to create those mappings. So any custom entities you created, the tables or columns or any other data, you need to map it yourself. So basically, you can extend XML files. You can also execute your own code, because the data migration tool runs inside Magento 2, so you have access everywhere. And you can create, from our experience, we created like a pre-migration step, which cleans some of the data. Then you can have some additional steps in the middle to, for example, copy your custom entities. And you might have some closing code, which is going to do some after migration steps. This is all possible with this tool. It's very extensible, so it works pretty well. So for anything else you don't want to migrate, and this is the key point, and you will understand why I'll start working with the tool, you can skip any of the entities. So basically, if you want Magento to ignore any of the data, any of the columns, you just put them into ignore tag, and Magento will skip it for you. So once it's configured, you should run it. So we divided it into 5 steps.
Yeah, so these steps come loosely from Magento's own documentation. We've simplified it a bit, but they've got a really handy graph on their developer documentation as well that talks about this a bit more. But when you've built your Magento 2 site and you've fixed up all of your Magento 1 data and you're ready to run the migration, and that's no small step, by the way, the first thing you need to do is stop activity in Magento 1. You can keep your site open and taking orders, but don't let anyone into the admin, disable your cron, and disable any API access you have for integrations. You need those to not be running. If disabling these things is going to really cause you issues on your site, you can just put your Magento 1 store into maintenance mode now, but you will have your site down for potentially much longer than you would want to otherwise, and you won't be taking orders in that time.
OK, the next step is to migrate settings. It's a separate command in Magento namespace. And because the database structures for Magento 1 and Magento 2, which are storing those data, didn't change that much, it's pretty straightforward. Takes a couple seconds. We never had any issues with it. And also important information for you, it's called settings migration step, but it actually takes your stores and the websites and store groups. So if you see settings, there are stores and the websites in as well.
Okay. The next step is the bulk migration step, which takes pretty much your entire database and chucks it onto Magento 2. This is the step that takes the most time to run, although as we saw earlier, that's not particularly long anyway. But it's also in development the step that you'll spend most of your time with. This is the step that touches most of your data. It's the step that finds most of the issues in your data. And trust me, you have plenty of them. Magento's recommendation, one which we fully endorse, is that you run this on a copy of your Magento 1 database, not on a live person-facing version. But make sure that dump is taken after you stopped all your activity on the Magento 1 store. So halt your Magento 1 site, take that database dump, copy it over, and then migrate that. There is one tiny little caveat. If you are choosing not to take your orders with you, you might have reasons for that. We think you should. But if you don't take them with you, please, please, please migrate your sequence tables, the ones that create the unique order increment IDs, because that's the step in the migration that makes these. And if they're not there, when your customers try to check out on Magento 2, they try to create an order, they're going to get an exception. And across your whole site, I cannot think of a place I would less like to have an exception thrown than the final step of the checkout. The final thing that the bulk migration step does is set up triggers for the Delta mode, so the things that enable the migration step to respond to changes in real time.
OK, so Delta migration step, this is the actual step we demoed to you today. We wanted to save some time, 20 minutes is not long enough to show you the whole process, but it's quite an exciting step. Max said, to put your store into maintenance mode. If you did that, you can skip this step because nothing has changed in Magento 1. If you didn't do it and your Magento 1 is still running and Magento 2 is still running, you need something to synchronize the data. And this is the step you want to run. how it works, it basically takes the data from those additional tables which were created in the previous step and migrates them over into Magento 2. It's, when I was working with it, it's a very, very quick tool. So when I tested it, it can migrate like 100,000 records under an hour. I'm not sure if anyone here has a store which is generating like 30 orders per second. So then it's going to take an hour to migrate it. Otherwise, I think you're fine. And it's actually designed to run for a short period of time. So when you actually deployed your MagentaTo site, you copied the data, and you're still testing if MagentaTo site is correct. You shouldn't run it for weeks or anything like that. It is actually part of the data migration. This is not something you're going to be doing on your local machine. This should happen on the production. You can customize it to run it for longer, but that will require quite a lot of changes because the data migration tool is very sensitive to comparing the data changes, and it's only one-way migration from Magento 1 to Magento 2. And once you start using Magento 2, there will be more data on Magento 2 rather than on Magento 1, and Delta step will just stop and say, sorry, I don't know what to do with it, and it will stop migrating the data. So the only thing, the other thing you need to know about it, it only maps the customer-centric data. So it will take your customers, it will take the orders and customer addresses and so on, but it will not take any catalog or product changes. That's why Max said to actually stop any activity or put your whole site into maintenance mode. So no one from merchandising team are not suddenly creating super important product. The whole Magento 1 should be stopped. You can still take orders, but it should not make any catalog changes.
Right, so we've got our Magento 2 site up. We've got the Delta migration mapping our Magento 1 changes across. Try it out. Make a few test orders, kick the tires a bit, see how it goes. If you're confident that your site's good, fill up your DNS, take a really deep breath, and grab yourself a cold one, because you just deployed to Magento 2 for the first time, and congratulations.
OK, I have a couple additional tips for you. And I know that you are excited about Magento 2. You want to migrate to Magento 2, but it doesn't mean that you don't need to have a knowledge about Magento 1. And it's quite important because the data migration tool, it's very similar to test-driven development, where you start with the red and you want to make it green. So data migration tool will throw a lot of exceptions at you, and it will stop. So it will not give you the whole picture, how many errors your data has. You need to battle them one by one. So in many cases, the error message says, like, sales quote table has some mismatched data in there. And that's it. So you need to go to Magento 1, compare the data, what you have there, what you have in Magento 2, and you need to understand all the connections between entities, what EAVs are, where the attributes are stored, and so on and so on. So you need to be pretty good in Magento 1 as well. To help you in this process, we developed our own internal way we work with this tool. And the way we work with it, we script our process as much as we can. So create a shell script and try to put any steps you do into the script so you can run it over and over again, and you can avoid any human errors there. And that will give you the repeatable process you want, because this is what's going to happen in production later on. Also, what's going to help you is you can incorporate database dumping into those scripts. So take dumps as often as you can, or whenever you achieve some bigger milestone. That will allow you to, first of all, repeat the process again, and also you can take a step back rather than starting from the scratch. Also, when there's a larger team working on the data migration, those scripts can be shared, and those database dumps can be shared, so that's going to speed up the whole team. OK, so obviously working with the data migration tool, we recommend you to create like a separate module only for that. So you can store all the XML files you produced, any code you produced, maybe dumps or whatever was used in your process, and check it into your source control. So first of all, you're not going to lose those changes. You're going to have track what's happened over time, and then that's going to be easier for you to collaborate. And what's most important is that's going to become part of your project rather than files stored on my local computer, and then when we want to go live, like, where are those files? So yeah, try to do that.
Yeah, and there's a few things you can do during development to minimize the time you're sat there, doing nothing, waiting for the migration tool to run. first of all, we mentioned that Magento, the data migration tool, rehashes your passwords to Magento2's algorithm. This is great, pretty much bug-free, and really, really slow. In development, we really recommend that you turn it off and just turn it back on again just before you go live to make sure there are no serious issues. We don't expect that to be there. That saves you, quite a bit of time in the long run. We see speed-ups of, code time of around about 100% running the tool on PHP 7 versus PHP 5.6. So you're a dummy if you don't do that. And you can save some time in the migration by having your source and destination databases on the same installation of MySQL accessible by the same user. This allows the data migration tool to copy certain tables that haven't changed with just an insert from select rather than pulling them out through the tool and pushing it back in, which is actually quite a slow process. But the biggest thing you can do for performance of the data migration tool during development is to take a sample of your data and not work with the whole data set. All right? The data migration tool is roughly linear with the amount of data you have. It stands to reason that 1/10 of your data will run through the migration tool in 1/10 of the time. And if you sample your data correctly, it's totally feasible to end up with a database that is only 10% of the size, but contains at least 90% of your data's issues. The first thing you do is leave your EAV structure alone. You're going to have a lot of issues in there with certain custom attribute models and such. You need all of those, so don't take any out of that. Remove 90% of your products, but do make sure you've got an even split of simple, configurable, bundle, gift card, whatever, across your attribute sets as well. Then you can take out all your empty categories. You should have a few because you just took out 90% of your products. Then from there, you can do a DOM removal of just 90% of your customers, 90% of your orders, and any other large entities that you're migrating.
OK, so cleaning your data. This is the actual work you're going to be doing while working with the data migration tool. And as I said before, data migration tool will throw exceptions at you, and to fix those exceptions, you need to clean your data. So the way you work with it, as I said, throw exceptions, you check where is it, you go there, you compare, you work on it, try to fix your data, and then you run it again and again and again. Also, this is actually a good time to step back a little bit and look at your data, because we are changing platform here. And do you really need those 200 product attributes in Magento 2? Do you want to pollute your new shiny Magento 2 website with all those crap data you have in Magento 1? You can actually look at them. Maybe some of the features are already in Magento 2, so you don't need those attributes there. Also, you can look at your products. I'm sure there will be plenty of products you're no longer selling, and you just keep them just in case or for some reference. You can keep them in Magento 1 for the reference, but you should really migrate what you need to Magento 2. Also, you can clean up your categories or any other entities or tables. Maybe it's a good time to look at your actual database structure. Also, we have quite interesting scenario where some of the attributes can be optional in Magento 1, but they are required in Magento 2. And a good example is a telephone field in customer address. So we had a situation where we couldn't migrate because the telephone was optional and there was no data in Magento 1. So solution for that is you can just fill it with some dummy data and deal with it after the migration.
Right, so that's all we've got for you. We've got a minute left or so. We'd love to take some questions, but we're also aware that we're all that stands between you and the networking lunch. So if anyone has any questions, please put their hand up or shout. If not, we'll all go get some food.
Yeah, also I just want to mention that maybe if anyone is interested to see the whole migration, or maybe you would like to see the XML files or any other aspects of the demo we did today, you can find us around, and we are happy to demo it on the laptop. We'll talk about it later. So any questions?
Yeah, what's
With regards to the XML files and the map,
yeah.
to contact vendors of M1 modules to get them to supply mapping files so that we don't have to put them down ourselves? Or?
I'm not sure. Yeah, sorry. The question was for certain third-party modules that have replacements in Magento 2, what is the story of getting these mapping files? Do we have to write them ourselves, or does that module vendor provide them? I don't know. As far as I know, some proactive module vendors are writing them themselves. So I don't think Magento is enforcing any requirement. I think it's just.
Trying to put like a single place to go.
I haven't seen any.
Is there a place? No, Ben says there's no plan for a single place to look. So I guess, yeah, for your crucial modules, contacting them is going to be the best place to go.
We can send you a request, Ben, for that.
Request all you want.
We'll do it. Any more questions?
Yeah.
About the data migration,
Yeah.
is it possible to configure it to accommodate custom entities
Yeah.
that customer can change?
Yeah, so are you asking if it's possible to extend it to work with custom entities?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I have custom entities that customer can change, can I put it in data migration?
Yeah, Martin, do you want to take that? What's the extent to which you can customize the Delta migration step?
You can customize it as much as you want, really. So
Yeah.
Magento gives you what they think it's important, and which is like customers and nodes and everything around that. But yeah, nothing stops you to create your own mappings and your own handlers of that.
But if you do want to have your Magento 1 store operational fully while you're migrating, do remember that you're going to get things like cron will be running on both of them potentially. You can get duplicate, the order gets fulfilled in Magento 1, it goes off to wherever, migrated to Magento 2, Magento 2 says, I've got an order over here. That's why they say you shouldn't, have your Magento 1 cron and your admin operational. It's those reasons.
Yeah, also I just want to add to that, data migration tool is actually a very dumb tool. So it doesn't understand Magento or anything like that. It will do whatever it's told to be done. And data migration tool copies data one-to-one. So if your primary key in Magento 1 is 1, that's going to be 1 in Magento 2 as well. That's why I think Magento did this in purpose. So data migration tool is designed to run for a short time only in production. So I wouldn't depend on this tool as any tool for like preparation. That should be executed on production only. Any more questions?
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.